Hope you guys are here for sort of a chatty, rambly video because I thought it would be fun to do the Get to Know My Taste book tag where we can sort of deep dive into some generalities of things that you might see on this channel. And shout out to My Name is Marina's and her friend group for creating this book tag and sort of hosting this revival of it here in BookTube, because I think now is the perfect time for us all to sort of reintroduce ourselves as bookish creators. Starting with number 1, how do you rate books? I do a 1 to 5 star rating. I don't believe in half stars because if I ended up doing that, it would turn into a 1 to 10 star rating and I would still find a way to do half stars. And that would turn it into a 1 to 20 star rating, and it would go on and on and on until I had individually ranked each book in its own very specific decibel. And I just cannot get into all of those weeds with my own mind, especially because for me, star ratings can change depending on how I feel at the time or depending on the context of the rest of my life. I do actually have a video that goes into details about how I star rate. You can check out here, but the gist of it is if I am interested enough in a book that I actually pick it up to start reading it, it automatically starts with 3 stars, gains stars, or loses stars from there, which rolls very cleanly into number 2, how do you review books? What's your review style, and are you more analytical, emotional, casual, or structured? And you know, as I said, the book starts at 3 stars and gains stars or loses stars based on its quality. So if it's boring, poorly executed, problematic, lacking in basic grammar, formatting, or style, if it's confusing or offensive in some way, it starts dropping stars. And how far it drops stars really depends on how bad these problems were. I do try to reserve 1 star for something that's really incredibly offensively bad. I don't understand why people are okay with this book, which means that like a lot of poor books fall into this 2-star category and there's a really big range on it. I will say once in a blue moon, a book I enjoyed falls into the 2-star category as well, and that's because that read is highly problematic in a series of ways, but I still had a good time reading it. My Name is Marina's and her friends sort of have a name for these kind of reads. They call them the trash pocket reads, which is something that'll pop up later in these tags, and I'm adopting the term because it's perfect. Usually I am more positive towards my trash pocket reads than negative, which means they'll end up in 4 stars instead of 2 stars, but once in a while things are so rough in the trash pocket read, a book that I objectively realize is not a good book but had fun reading anyways, that even I have to give it the sad 2 stars. When you're looking at 3-star books, usually that means very little stood out to me. I didn't really like or dislike the book strongly, but also books I didn't like but executed at a very high level usually end up in 3 stars because I try to reserve 4 and 5 stars for books that I enjoy. So the 3 is sort of like a compromise where it didn't work for me for whatever reason that I'll expound upon, but I do see all of these things about it that are great and I understand why people like it. Also, 3 stars are sometimes things that I hated, but I know what audience it's for and I understand why that audience loves it. This is sort of like a non for me, attempting to balance the objective and subjective elements of reviewing, where I can see subjectively I hated this thing, but objectively it works for these reasons. You're not actually going to find a lot of books I loved in a 3-star category. I might have like a vaguely positive feel about a book that wasn't strong enough to cast it into 4 or 5 star, but like if I loved it, you're not going to find it in 3 stars. A book that hits 4 to 5 stars is something that is like excelling in some kind of way, and a book in 5 stars is something that I thought was nearly perfect. So again, there's a lot of 4 stars and very few 5, and in that regard I would say the star system itself is actually a pretty emotional range sort of thing where I talk about like my personal experience and whether or not I liked or disliked something, but then if you look at the actual details of the review, you're going to get a significantly more analytical and critical breakdown of things. What I am looking for in a book is standout elements. So that could be something thematic, that could be the character, it could be a really unique world building environment or premise, it could be an engaging mashup of things. It's doing something at a high level. If it's in 4 to 5 stars, or if it's in like 2 to 1 stars, it's doing something at a very low level, and I'll expound upon that. Not every book needs to be good at everything. It needs to be good at something to be in a 4 or 5 star range, just like it needs to be bad at something to be in those 2 to 1 stars. As far as like overall structure goes, I do actually sort of have a list that I go through to make sure I'm fully considering things. Generally speaking, if a book is doing something well or if it's doing something poorly at this phase in my reading life, it stands out without the help of the list. Before I leave something in 3 stars, I like to make sure I give it a full consideration. Number 3, what is the book that made you a reader? Whether it was an early favorite or one that got you hooked later, what was the one book that started it all? I have always been a reader. I have always loved stories and books. It's part of like my family lore that people tell me about even as like an infant, a toddler, a very young child. So from that regard, it's pretty hard for me to pick out any one single book. But if we were going to talk about books that helped me learn to read on my own and like started me in my individual novel and chapter journey, I guess I'd pick something like I, Houdini by Lynn Reed Banks, because that's one of the first books I can remember reading as a chapter book where I like really understood what I was reading and didn't need help from adults. When I was in first and second grade, third grade, even fourth grade, there were a bunch of chapter books that adults would sort of press to as like appropriate kids literature. It involved like the Babysitter's Club and the Boxcar Children and the Hardy Boys, and none of those genres really appealed to me, and I had a really hard time reading them. So something like I, Houdini that was very different, that was kind of like zany, animal focused, had kind of a little bit of a fantasy element because we're in the mind of the hamster and the hamster is like smart and thinking and critical, like really viewing things in a different way. That was probably the first book that was like engaging with me, that I really wanted to read on my own as like an extracurricular, you know, outside of picture books and stuff. Like before that, when I had the desire to read and learn more about stories, but I wasn't really enjoying or connecting with them. And then I think something that probably solidified reader in my young adult teen life is going to be the works of Tamara Pierce, starting with Olana the Lioness. I've always been more interested in fantasy, science fiction, speculative stuff, but I also have been raised to like really be looking for that strong female protagonist. So something like Olana the Lioness, like a woman who dresses up like a boy so she can secretly go through night school and like fulfill her own dream, but also prove that women could do it the whole time, has a lot of mass appeal to me, has like a really strong connection, and really let me know that fantasy and science fiction could be for women as well as for men, which sounds really dumb, but if you look at a lot of the classic literature that people sort of push on you for fantasy and science fiction, you will find the female protagonist is a little bit rarer there, especially at that time. And like now there are just so many better gems and better stories that portray all different kinds of women doing all different kinds of things, really like more non-traditional, interesting, dynamic stories, and I'm so here for it and glad I'm locked in. Do you have a genre or a niche that you gravitate towards, or do you read widely across genres? So I gravitate towards speculative fiction, that's fantasy, science fiction, and horror. I'm more than happy to read romance that are in those subgenres, and I'm also usually okay with thriller in those subgenres as well. But like if it's contemporary or historical without that speculative element, I'm significantly less interested in it. You know, for the right pitch, I am happy to cross genres and read it, especially if it's not too big or overwhelming of a book. But I think I have always preferred stuff that's in the speculative genre versus stuff that's like more literary. Number 5, do you prefer character-driven or plot-driven stories? I lean heavily towards character-driven stories. While I'm not a huge fan of cozy, I'm significantly more interested in reading a cozy character-centric story or a character study than I am in reading something that's action-adventure, bam, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. If I had to choose between the two, ideally you would do something that's well balanced between the character development and the plot development, and even more ideally you'd have chosen the right characters to go on the specific journey you're telling. I do think there's an issue if the plot and the characters don't align. It can be fun to have an unlikely hero or a character in an unlikely scenario, and in that way they can be the right character for this journey. But sometimes I just feel like we have the wrong character or the character is going on the wrong journey. One of the most relevant stories I can think of off the top of my head is Tender as the Flesh. I feel the journey that Marco is going on is the wrong story to tell for that world, for that character. Doesn't work together for me. Also, I would say like the character-driven element of that story and the journey he goes on, not so great and not interesting to me personally. Number 6, what's one book you love so much you don't care if others like it? What is the one book you love enough for everyone? Song for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers is one of these books. I really love that. I want to say I read that in 2022 or 2023, but like it really had a heavy impact. It made me understand why someone might like cozy fiction and made me rethink the way that I approach conflicts in storytelling. It was a speculative science fiction, I think, executing at the highest level. It was really interesting, beautifully descriptive, a wonderful character journey. And like, I don't care if other people find it boring or don't understand what I like about it or couldn't get into it. It's really, really good and I really love it. More recently, I really enjoyed the first 2/3 of Bloom. And I sat through a book meeting where a lot of the people who read it didn't much like it. And I understood where they were coming from, but I didn't agree. And in my head, I was like, I love this and I'm so invested in this so much that it doesn't really matter. I think another one might be Disseverment, which is a short extreme horror fiction where I really felt something from that book. So even though other people in reviews and stuff found it ridiculous or whatever, I liked it so much I don't think it matters what those other people felt about it. You know, if we're gonna talk about like more classic books, generally speaking, the Vampire Chronicles, I know they have a huge fan base, so I'm not alone in this one, but people who don't like it, even though I don't understand them, it also kind of doesn't matter. I really love The Scarlet Letter, and even though I understand why people can't stand it, I love it so much. It just doesn't matter that they hate it. And I also kind of feel similarly to Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. It's not the best of his plays, like objectively speaking, but there are some moments in that that are just really epic. I used to be able to directly quote that play. I don't know what it is about that one specifically, but there are so many elements in it that speak to me and that I feel like I can reference in modern day conversation. I don't think it matters that other people aren't into it. And I have this one book I would probably put in the trash pocket. It's a bad book. I don't recommend it, but I really like the fantasy of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I know she wrote it to like parallel the real world and explain what was wrong in our society, and I don't agree with that. I think there's so many elements of our world that she is not considering and that make this completely a fantasy world. But the idea that every single person can work really hard and excel in one thing that they're special and unique and good at and be recognized and praised for it, live a good life and be rewarded, I love that fantasy so much. And I want that to be true in our world very much so, even though I realize objectively there's a whole bunch of things that are impeding that, which make this whole treatise not work. But there's such a comfort in the idea that like if I worked really hard, if I pursued what I was passionate about, if I showed people what I was really good and talented with, they would acknowledge it, reward me, and value that. I think it helps that I read this book at a time when I really needed to hear that kind of messaging, and I read it in class with a teacher who was very passionate about it. And all of that sort of like contributes to my love of this work. And even though I never thought it would work here in the real world, and even though I can recognize the literature, the language, the structure of it is bad and wrong, I still like it, you know, just for that like little escapist moment it gave. What's a book you love so much that if you know someone else doesn't like it, your reading tastes don't align? It's the book or books where a difference of opinion indicates a strong difference in reading preference. There's definitely not any one book. I like so many like different little niche things in stories, like little specific things are what do it for me, that it's hard for me to find one book that sums it up definitionally, and to like where I might hone in on this one element and really into it and love something for that might not even like register on another reader's experience. And if they're not looking at it from that angle, then they're probably valid in the other things they didn't like about the book, you know? Very rarely is there a book where you could say something to me and I'd be like, no, that makes no sense, or no, I don't see how you could feel that way about it. I will say, if you don't like the vampires in the Vampire Chronicles, you're looking for a different take on vampires, our taste in vampire literature probably doesn't align. If you don't like creepy gothic like you would find in You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce or in Forgotten Sisters by Cynthia Palaio, gothic standards probably don't align. There are some books that I love that I am really surprised when other people don't like. Like, for example, I really loved Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin, and there were times where I was very excited because a bookish creator put it on their TBR and I was waiting for their review, and then they got to the review and they didn't like it. And even after they explained why they didn't like it, I didn't really understand. There is one creator in specific I'm thinking about where them not liking Manhunt and their explanation for why they didn't like it made me realize that like our taste in books is really, really different. And I probably should have realized that before them because I had read some of the books they recommended and not felt the same way they felt about it. But you know, a lot of times you sort of think about it as a one-off, and especially if they're, you know, presenting a bunch of shared interest books where you're like, yeah, I'm curious about that one too. You just kind of let it go, and that specific review of that specific book let me know that we, even though we have a lot of overlap in books that interest us, our ratings and reviews indicate that we're not looking for the same things in that overlapping material. Number 8, what is your trash pocket? What are the books or tropes or themes you know are bad but you just can't help yourself? So many things. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, just the first book. Serpent Serpents of Wings and Night by Carissa Broadbent. Again, just the first book. Ninth House and Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. For tropes, like most paranormal romance ends up being trash, but I just am really drawn to it, especially shifter werewolf romance kind of stories. I'm a sucker for dragon in stories and likewise for phoenixes, and most of what I read is garbage, but I really just like those things so much I keep reading anything related to it. And I definitely rate things that involve that kind of theme higher than I should. I love haunted houses, possessions, everything moody and gothic and ennui. I'm really a sucker for a story told in second person or for a story that's told in an epistolary style. Obviously, all that stuff is pretty generalized. There's some that are really excellent that do this, but there's also some garbage that I have really enjoyed just for these vibes. Number 9, do you have any deal breakers in books? Something that, if present, immediately turns you off to a book? I'm one of those people that tends to think anything can work, and it's the execution where it either sinks or swims. That said, I am extremely sensitive to like a student-teacher relationship, a student-mentor relationship, especially if that relationship is portrayed in a positive light. Even when both the characters are adults, I don't like it. And even when the teacher holds like limited power, like I'm thinking maybe it's your music instructor and you're not taking a class, you're just taking like a half-hour lesson with them, I still don't like it. I don't know why I'm so sensitive to it. I don't know why I don't like it so strongly, but I feel very aggressive about it. And the second it like pops up, especially if it's in a positive, romantic, or aspirational light, I'm almost always out. And I hate this trope so much. It extends out to related tropes like a lay person, religious person, a doctor, patient, a prisoner, and a guard. To be fair, that's a little bit to varying degrees. Like there's some technicalities there that I overlook, or I am less angry about it when I see it, but I don't like it, and I certainly don't hunt fiction out that has that in it. Generally, I'm also out if the girls be fighting for no good reason, or if the girls are fighting over a man. I don't like jealousy between women, and I especially don't like if your female best friend betrays the female lead. I'm usually 100% out on that story too. I'm out for almost any and all love triangle, especially with the rise in popularity of Why Choose stories. I don't understand why the love triangle is still a legitimate like plot device. I'm out in the third act breakup, and I'm usually not in for a second chance romance. I do believe there's a world where probably any of these tropes can be fine. I think I've even read books where all of these tropes have happened and I either haven't minded them or even liked them potentially. But if you're recommending a book to me and your selling point is any of these tropes, I'm probably not the right audience. What's a strong opinion you have about a book that got published in the last year? Okay, so I don't read many current books. Here's my list of hot takes. Hungerstone is amazing in concept but mid-tier in execution and leaves you feeling kind of empty and hollow at the end without like any definitive solutions. The Wild Wolf's Rejected Mate is gonna be the book that makes you put down the 5-pack series forever. Blood Mountain lacks any of the stakes, excitement, or originality that was in the first book in Jody Luna's series. Goldfinch by Raven Kennedy is the worst book in the Plated Prisoners series and one of the most massive letdowns I've read in a series finale ever, where it did not deliver a single anticipated scene I wanted or a single character moment that made me smile. The Boy in the Iron Box by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan illustrates that Guillermo del Toro can tell both beautiful stories visually as well as in writing, and I really want a mini-series of this one. The Alpha of Bleak Isle is one of the best dragon shifter stories I've read in a long time. The Alone Time by El Mar is a captivating read that keeps coming up in my mind even almost a year after I read it, and even though it's well outside my general genre wheelhouse, it very much appeals to me. Number 11, what do you look forward to in writing? What makes a book stand out to you? Is it prose, style, theme, voice, structure, or something else entirely? All of these things. Any single one of them will do it. I'm really looking for a standout moment. And I'm not super picky about what stands out in the book. It just needs to be something. I do love a unique, well-told story. If it hasn't been done before, or if it's approaching something that's pretty stereotypical from a different angle, I'm very softened towards liking it. Usually you get immediate bonus points just for attempt. But if you're looking for like that overall high score, you have to execute execute on that unique idea. Number 12, how do you decide what to read next? Do you plan ahead? Do you mood read? Or do you follow external factors like hype or recommendations? So historically, I've been a mood reader. I do occasionally take recommendations or fall for hype. I'm more prone to taking recommendations than falling for hype because hyped up books usually aren't in my budget wheelhouse, where like recommended ones can often be found on Kindle Unlimited, or it can be found for free depending on when those free ebook deals hit. More recently, I have tried to be a little bit more structured in my reading. Like I have 2 book groups that I always read with. One of them is going to be the Weirdo Book Club that Natalie runs, the Weirdo Book Club, and the other one is going to be Women in Horror that Naomi runs. And this year in particular, I'm trying my hand at some readathons and reading challenges. So when we do Love in the Night Paranormal Readathon, I will be there. Right now, we're also reading T.A. White's Phoenix Rising book, and I've read book 1 and I'm ready for the book meeting. Also, I'm trying a little bit of a read what you own challenge. Mostly, I'm focused on the reading what I own part, not so much the not getting new books part. Maybe next year I'll reevaluate and see if I should stop purchasing new books as well, or if I just need to try and keep up with what I've got. I do this both just on my own month to month, but I am also doing it with the Unstuff Your Kindle challenge that Bex Read does, and every other month they picked out a themed element to sort of help you pick titles to read. Beyond that, I have a couple more personal challenges and planned out videos, so there are at least 4 books on the docket right now that I need to read this year, and like a time I need to read them by so I can script, edit, and produce a video on time for that release. Which does roll me in pretty cleanly to number 13. Where do you get inspiration for your booktube content? What sparks video ideas, other creators, trends, personal reading influences? And I would say yes, all of the above. Me starting this booktube came internally, like my desire to want to talk about books more. Though as I engaged more with the community, it also had a community component where I'd want to talk about things that other people were talking about. I'd want to get in on things other people were reading. I want to participate in readathons. I want to share more of that community aspect, get more involved in that. And through that, I've also sort of started tracking more book releases and getting more hype for various titles, which means that sometimes I am chasing a trend, or sometimes I'm trying to take my interest and align it with the current trend. I do always want to maintain that desire to talk about books, my own authentic spin and presentation, but more recently I've been trying to also pair that with things that seem to be interesting or popular in the community at large. Number 14, if you could make any book go viral right now, what would it be? What book do you think deserves more attention? That is one heck of a power. I think selfishly, I have 2 different Dragon Shifter stories I would give more attention. One is The Deadly Dragons Duet by Colette Rhodes, and the other is Phantom Orchid by Mercedes Jade. I picked these 2 stories out because they are Dragon Shifter romances, so they sort of align with the book talk buzzy style story that does tend to go viral. But also, I tend to read these books once a year or once every other year, so it's something that I really wish more people would read so I could talk to them about and maybe come to a conclusion that I'm personally secretly obsessed, or maybe they're really good and they just need more love. If we're gonna step outside my own personal selfishness and more realistically consider the question, I would say The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of Talents really need to go viral right this second. These are 2 books by Octavia E. Butler that sort of start us off in late 2016 and go a little bit past our current present. And I love the way it chronicles this time and how it specifically parallels the time we are living in right now, because I enjoy comparing what happened in the real world versus what happened in this alternative world. I like the dystopian parable-esque nature of it. I like the founding of religion. I like the diverse cast. I really enjoy Octavia E. Butler's writing style, and I just need more people to talk about these books. I really need these 2 series to become a limited run TV show that takes us all the way through Parable of Talents. I think about these 2 books all the time and have thought about them since I first read them, and I really truly wish there were more people I could have a conversation specifically about the books and comparing what's happening in the books to what's happening in our timeline, that timeline versus our timeline, because it's just very interesting, eerily related in a lot of areas, and I would like to hash it out with more people. Also, I think it would make for some great TikTok skits, because you could talk about what happened in the book world, them flashing into our world and realizing it's all the same or slightly different but worse in some ways, or slightly different but better in some ways. I just think there's a great format in there somewhere to. And number 15, who are some booktubers whose tastes align with yours? I feel like with most booktubers, it's really very mixed. Like, I read a lot of recommended books at this juncture, and sometimes I love them, and sometimes I'm sort of less mixed on them. I'm almost always excited to try something from Tangible Reads because I think her take is really interesting and unique. I don't always agree with her, but I want to take the recommendation and pick it up. I read a decent amount of recommendations from Heather over at Hia Booktubes. Our tastes don't completely align, but what we both like, we both really like. I'd say the same is true with Izzy from Happy for Now. The closest I can think of is probably going to be Natalie from the Weirdo Book Club. Not everything, but like I want to say a good 90% of what she likes I end up liking too. I'd say the same for like Starry Steph Reads, and a shocking amount from Naomi, who is this person I found via a Fable book club and then ended up following her social media and her bindery from there. Like, I am consistently stunned by how often she recommends things I've already read and loves them for the same reasons. Which just goes to show you that in the bookish online world, you will eventually find your bookish twin, and probably when you least expect. So that's gonna be my get to know my book taste reading tag. I hope you feel like you know me a little bit better, maybe got a couple good recommendations from it. If you got this far in the video, the secret emoji is going to be a fantasy castle, and the comment challenge is going to be to answer any one of these questions in the comments down below. And as always, keep reading.